to the East, which has got to be the most interesting East race in history. Therefore, I don't know, a couple of hours there, Kentucky was in the driver's seat in the East until they gave it up at the very end to Georgia this weekend because Florida was already, had already lost. And granted, they were tied, but still, given Florida still got their game against LSU, it just throws a big wrench into things because if Florida would have already played that game against LSU, we'd know a little bit more. But man, there's a log jam at that between that 4-3, 3-4 kind of space. Even South Carolina has an outside chance. So talk about how we got here in the East and maybe a little bit where we're going.
Right. The East, all year, I don't know that there's a team in the East that hasn't been disappointed. And it's kind of funny, right? Because usually with conferences and matchups, somebody has to be happy with the way things turned out, right? For every team that loses, a team wins. For every team that wins, a team loses. Somebody usually comes out on top, right? In the West, they've had a lot of back and forth, but it ended up being that Alabama and Auburn are pretty happy at the expense of a lot of other teams. But in the East, everybody's just kind of managed to beat each other. And the teams that thought they were going to come out generally unscathed, be it Tennessee fans early in the year, Georgia thought they were being resurgent. They're all a little down in the dumps. I think a lot of it is because Tennessee fans were expecting their team to be really good. We talked about it in the preseason. We didn't really quite buy the hype. We thought the potential was there because of the number of returning starters, but we also noted that Tennessee really, as close as they were to winning a lot of games last year, they were they were just as close to losing a lot of them, and it was probably unrealistic given their very very difficult schedule for them to do all that well. But what's happened is Florida and Georgia see a Tennessee team that's underperformed, and they haven't been able to take advantage. And the same thing's been true of Kentucky. We always knew South Carolina was going to struggle just because of where they were at in terms of talent and Spurrier's management of the program, frankly, when he left. Vanderbilt is Vandy in Missouri was, I don't know what their expectations are really ever at in Missouri. I don't know that they expected to be this bad, but um, it's kind of what we thought given the talent level. I just think these are teams that all are fairly equal, which means that they're all beating and losing to each other, and it's created a situation where nobody is happy with the way things turned out. I will add too, though, that part of the problem is that the West is genuinely a lot better than the East, and that's given all the East teams extra losses that really hurt their records.
Well, and I think it's funny. I saw somebody say today that I think that a six-way tie is still possible in the East, which is crazy to me. And, it's funny you mention the West because sometimes the West decides the East champion based on, what kind of draw they get. But this year it seems like equal opportunity losers in the East against the West. You thought that Florida had the easiest road when LSU was looking down a little bit, and then Arkansas really looking down. But the easier of the two they had left in the West, or their two games in the West, was Saturday, and they lost 31-10. So, real quick, want to touch on it right now. Florida's 4-2, Kentucky's 4-3, and Tennessee is 2-3. So, I feel like 5-3 gets it done. And if we're operating under that premise, then Kentucky actually has the easiest road to hoe, in my opinion, because they've got Tennessee left. They're already at 4-3. If they beat Tennessee, they're at 5-3, and then Florida's still got a salty South Carolina team and at LSU. So Kentucky's still not out of it.
Yeah, and it's crazy to say, but you know why Kentucky's down out of it? Really, it's because uh, it's simple stat. Kentucky is the only team in the SEC East to have beaten a team in the SEC West. They're the only one. They beat Mississippi State. Every other every other game, every West team has won, unless I'm completely missing something. So, it's kind of astonishing when you think about it that you say, well, Tennessee had this horrible draw with Alabama and A&M, and you wanted to say, well, that was going to determine it. But what we underestimated was, like you said, Arkansas would beat Florida, and it's not a shock if LSU beats Florida. Georgia already lost badly to Ole Miss, may lose to Auburn this weekend. A lot of these still to be played, but that quote unquote bad draw by Tennessee has been completely negated because nobody else can win their draws. And because Kentucky at least won one of them, that gives them a leg up on everybody else. And yeah, like you said, it's, for those that don't know, this is the way it shakes out. Florida at 4-2 in conference play. Um, if they win out, meaning, due to the reschedule, they have a backloaded slate here. They've only played 6 conference games. So they're going to have to play LSU, and then they're going to have to play, and they'll have to play South Carolina. And if they win those 2 games, they're in. They're 4-2. They have nobody else. Everybody else has more than 2 losses. But if they drop one, then they tie currently with Kentucky. They're the only other team with only 3. Florida wins the head-to-head, so Florida really needs to drop both the South Carolina and LSU game. A few weeks ago, maybe that would have been far-fetched, but right now you probably think Florida will drop the LSU game, and the South Carolina game is by no means a gimme. Kentucky has already played 7 SEC games, so their only remaining game is against Tennessee. Now, Tennessee, oddly enough, has only played 5. Their schedule is very backloaded just in terms of number of conference games. Now, all that's left is Kentucky, Missouri, and Vandy. But this week's game against Kentucky, if Tennessee drops that, Tennessee falls in 2-4. Kentucky is at 5-3. At that point, Kentucky cannot lose to Tennessee in conference rankings, cannot lose to Georgia, cannot lose to South Carolina or anyone else. The only team that can beat them if they beat Tennessee is Florida, because Florida again has that head-to-head tiebreaker. So again, Florida, if they win out, they're in. If Florida drops 2 and Kentucky beats Tennessee, then Kentucky is in. And then the next question is, what happens if Tennessee wins out? Well, Tennessee beat Florida. So if Tennessee wins out and Florida drops 1, Tennessee will be in. Again, if Tennessee wins out, that means Kentucky has lost. So Tennessee ends up ahead of Kentucky. And basically, to sort of spin that all out, unless you want to get really crazy, 3 teams left. Florida in the driver's seat. And if Florida loses, then it's going to be the Kentucky-Tennessee winner.
And Florida is in the driver's seat, but they have the toughest road left. So that's what makes this kind of cool, is the fact that the team in second place has played 7 games already. So I know we didn't review this game, and it's an 11 a.m. game this Saturday, but Kentucky, Tennessee, man, that's an interesting game because of all that's at stake right now. So for a team that was ready to fire their head coach a couple weeks in, it's funny what happens when you kind of let people hang around, kind of let them do their thing. Sometimes they find a way to stay in it and keep their job safe. So if you had to call it right now, let's say it, I know there's a lot of football left to be played, but if you had to call it right now, who's winning the West, who's winning the East? Let's put a punctuation on this week with that call.
Right. If I had to call it today, I think it's probably going to be Tennessee. I think Florida is going to lose to LSU and drop to 4-3, beat South Carolina, and 5-3. I think Tennessee will win out. That will put them at 5-3. Kentucky necessarily drops to 4-4 because they will have lost to Tennessee. Tennessee gets the tiebreaker and beats Florida. Now, that's assuming a lot that Tennessee can sort of recover, because I do not think it's a given, given their injury level, that they will win. And they may very well lose to Kentucky. But that's my guess. And I'm really hedging on this. I think Kentucky is definitely the least likely option, because Florida has to lose twice, and I don't think that's probably going to happen. So I think it's probably Tennessee, maybe Florida. Oh gosh, I thought I had this made up in my mind, and now I'm hedging. But mm, yeah, I think Tennessee is probably going to be the East winner. It's just so freaking close. And I'll say this right, if to sort of break it down how weird this situation is. If Kentucky wins out, South Carolina were to win out, and Vanderbilt were to win out, you would have a six-way tie in the SEC East.
It's just bizarre. I can't remember a year where we had something this weird this late in the season. Um,
Yeah, I don't think there's any result. Let me put this clear. I don't think there's any result that has better than say a 30%
and
chance of
this is one
happening.
of those like the Heisman odds and the national championship odds that you'd like to see what Vegas is saying about all these because they're probably just as confused as we are. If I had to pick, I'm going to go with Alabama in the West, but I think Auburn, obviously at 5-1, still has a legit shot, especially since I've been calling them to beat Georgia since they were 1-2, since Auburn was 1-2. So I think they win that one. We've already talked about that game, but still give me Bama in the West. I don't know why I'm saying this, but give me Florida in the East. I guess that means Tennessee has to drop 2 out of 3 against what historically are 3 no-name teams. But Tennessee has Josh Dobbs and a triage unit of battered and beaten third teamers. So I don't know. They're
Okay, I got to push you on that. So who do you think Tennessee would lose to? I mean, between Kentucky, Missouri, Vandy, you think Kentucky beats them?
I think Kentucky beats them. Yeah.
But but then that begs the question, because if Kentucky beats them and Florida, if you think Florida will lose to LSU and South
No,
Carolina, then
I think
Kentucky
Florida
wins it.
will lose to LSU or South Carolina and win the tiebreaker with Kentucky.
Oh, I get you. I see what you're saying now. That Tennessee drops. Uh, well, they only really need to drop one, right? And but you're saying they'll probably actually
I
drop
think they
two,
dropped
and
2.
then Florida, yeah, and then Florida only drops one, and Florida goes. Earlier today, I thought that was the scenario. I thought was the most likely. By the way, I was leaning Florida earlier, and just in this conversation, changed my
And
mind.
that's
But
why I said I think this is actually so much more interesting than the West is we've got a big old pile of mediocrity and it's turning out to be a really exciting finish of mediocrity for who gets the joy of playing Alabama or Auburn in the SEC championship game and it being a repeat. I know this is way too early to call this, but a repeat of what we've seen in Atlanta for the last long time. And it's starting to become an epidemic across college football. I know I said we are going to put a punctuation. One last thing. The divisions in the Big Ten are asinine. They need to change them. It's ridiculous because it's going to lead to Michigan and Minnesota this year. Like, come on.
yeah, yeah, I'm kind of curious how many SEC fans are really aware that Minnesota is currently winning the division
Right?
ahead of
Right?
Wisconsin. And so yeah, it there's no excuse. I mean, there's just no
No.
freaking excuse for where the Big Ten is at. That they put Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska in one side, and they put Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan State in the same freaking
Yeah, and
division.
it's not just like the SEC is cyclical. The East dominated for a while. It's not just that. If you look at that collection of teams over history, save a couple of years in the 90s for Nebraska and then, further back, there's no excuse for that. So, and now, hey, Big 12's going to join in and have their own championship game. So,
Yeah, I will disagree with you. By the way, I think Wisconsin wins out, beats Minnesota, and takes that
I know,
division.
but
So
for
yeah,
the
you get
joke, it was a lot better with Minnesota.
it is well. Minnesota is the world's greatest joke, and I will forever support that.
So y'all, we're rambling because we're running late. It's after midnight on the East Coast, so that's our show for this week. Thanks so much for sticking around for our weird format this week, where we're not talking about 3 games. Again, thanks to podcast listeners, thanks to YouTube watchers, and sometimes only listeners. Y'all please comment. Comments for this week on East and West videos. Tell us who you think wins these divisions. Comment on the Auburn Georgia game. Give us a score. Tell us what you think that game's going to end up being. That's it for this week. Get outside. Enjoy the weather. God bless. Have a great one. See ya.